I actually come at this recognizing that it's not about number one, it's not about coercion, it's not about convincing, it's not about trying to sell a used vacuum cleaner. You know, that it's all about just heralding an information. And you said you used to be Christian, so you actually recognize that, you know.
Yeah,
But
you
without a
know, but
doubt.
it's like I tell people, channel
Hmm.
for a different reason.
Now, I'm telling him all of this because I'm letting them know that I'm not trying to convince you. Because a lot of times atheists put Christians in the stance where a Christian has to show them evidence. But what I'm trying to let him know is that I come from at it from a biblical perspective that says that you already know uh, that there's a God and you're just denying it. And I think he knows that, even without me directly telling him. And I have spoken to him before, and I tell him, I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just letting you know what I believe. And so if you want to know what I believe, as per, 2 Peter 3:15, rather 3:5 or something like that, it talks about making your apologia as to um, what it is you believe, right? And so you're telling them why I have the hope that I have within me, and how I reference God, and what why I believe as a person. But the evidence to show a person who's committed to denial, to show him any evidence, is basically just for them to blaspheme the name of God and deny God in your face. So I don't want to continue hearing any of that, or as much, no more than I absolutely need to. And so I'm just trying to get to his worldview and demonstrate how ridiculous his worldview is. And I believe I do that here when I demonstrate to the audience that he's equivocating, he's dancing around, he's inventing words and verbiage, changing definitions, using hypotheticals, which is they would love to do that. They love to say, well, give examples and stuff to get you out of your physical and your present situation that you're talking about, the topic that's at hand, and they like to do that in order to strengthen their argument. But here, I think we're just doing qualifies. I may have to fast forward a bit.
One of the primary reasons, my first and primary reason is because if there is a such thing as a soul, and that soul can be tormented or have live a blissful life, or if that soul can get a positive feedback once I die, I would like to know the answer to that question. Two, if we are going to believe in things without evidence, should we use those things to make laws in the universe and decide how we treat each other?
See, this is his shtick. If you're going to believe things without evidence, right? Evidence, evidence. I'm telling him there is more than enough evidence, and I'm going to demonstrate that to him. But he's committed to denying that evidence, and so we cannot move forward because, I say there is evidence. He says there's not. Okay, so that's what the whole conversation is about. The worldview, and how can you literally say there's no evidence? And this conversation could have gone a lot longer, but if it wasn't for me determining that it was a waste of time, because he was just equivocating with the basics of what we could possibly obviously see.
That's the other question is, if we don't have good reason to believe in these things, then well, how should we treat each other? I think that ends up just being to us, and not to a higher power. And three, I am a seeker of truth. I do not believe any position, thought, or any idea worth holding. If it's not worth scrutinizing or challenging, then for me, it's just not worth holding. So,
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that, and I understand that that's the situation. That's everybody has to go. We're on all a conveyor belt through life. We all have to go through a turnstile of life. We all have to make our own decisions in life. We're the ones that nobody will be sharing that casket with us when we're 6 feet under. So we have to make these. Nobody was born with us, okay, unless we have a twin, of course. But that's basically how things are. So we have to make these decisions for ourselves. If there's a God, we will be accountable for that God. We can't bring on anybody else along with us. Well, we can't do what Adam did with Eve. Oh, she had me bite the, whatever. He still got his. But it's like, my thing is, if I can enlighten you based on my perspectives, and how I see the world, okay, then perhaps maybe you can utilize that for yourself, because I take it that the topic is a personal question to yourself in order to find information for yourself, right? So my true belief is that after reading the scriptures and believing in the Christian worldview, in the God of the Bible, that sticking true to that faith, I don't believe that, and no one walks the earth not knowing that there's a God. I think everything we see around us, the technology that built the microwave oven, the heavens, how everything came together, human biology, our own consciousness, our anger, okay, the product of our sin, the product of our imperfection, the love we have for our children, all of those things for me point me towards God. And I say, well, if it wasn't for the scriptures, then I would say, okay, so these things exist, but where do they come from? Okay, I know there's something huge and created all of these things, but then Christ comes along and then he points to God and he says that I am God in his image. I demonstrate love and hate and humanity in the way it's supposed to be. And then I look and I say, well, he said that the creator was the one who did this, and that the creator is waiting and expects us to live in certain ways. And he gives us that information that we've needed as humanity to pass us down, to get us now past the general revelation of everything that is true, and now to give us the special revelation, which is the scriptures that have come down from heaven, which are yet another miraculous way that they've lasted the way they have, and they've come down to us. And so I see miracles and I see God's power in all of those different things, and those things will embed what you believe is what you are. They embed in your person, in your psyche, and who you are, and then you make decisions based on that. Because of that, I believe in that evidence, general revelation and special revelation. I believe that I have a personal relationship with Christ and I've been born again into a new man. Then I have experiential reasons to believe, as I've shed many things of my personalities that I find that should not be there, and the Bible says that should not be there. I see the miraculous growth in that over the course of 35, 40 years. And so now I have experiential that tells me in my personality, in my personal being, that God is real. And I see these things, and I say, well, the scriptures demonstrate the aspects of mankind that the world seems to want to push away for some reason. The world wants to inflate the human power, the capacity, the mentality. The human does not come out of the womb as growing in humility. It grows in the sense of wanting to survive and wanting to do whatever it needs to do in order to survive. And in that case, it will be selfish. It will grow into being a sinner. The world denies sin. The world says it's okay to sin. The world finds different ways for us to sin and not to love our neighbor. The world preaches one thing but demonstrates something else. The world demonstrates historically that it hates its neighbor and goes to war with its neighbor and moves the goalposts for its neighbor. We don't see love, but we desire it. We have an inner desire to respect each other, but yet we can't never attain it. All of these things to me tell me that God is real, and that what God has been telling us about humanity, where we're going and what we are, gives me an identity of knowing where I came from, where I'm going, what all life is about, how I should treat my neighbor, how I should be in my community. And I find that the not God worldview talks about it, wears the flowers in the hair, but can never measure up, and then wants to equivocate whenever they try to question why these things are not happening. They still want to pick themselves up from their bootstraps, but not able to. They don't know how. They don't have inner peace. They don't know where they're coming from. They can't know where they're going because they developed a nihilistic framework of existence, meaning that I might matter now, but I don't matter in the future because I'm just stardust. I'm just a matter in motion. But therefore, if you logically conclude that, then that means you're a beautiful little daughter, and the great hugs that grandma used to give you mean nothing either, mean nothing. And so that's why I think it's so much more susceptible for a person to be like, oh, well, let me just get rid of it all right now, because none of this stuff has any real transcendent value to it. And so I think that's the logical conclusion of the not God worldview. Whereas we do have evidences, and people have evidences all the time. One person will say, yes, that's evidence. There you have it. That answers it for me. Another person will look at it cockeyed and they'll say, no, I don't want to apply that evidence. I don't want to see it. So the question is, either you don't see it, or we've been embroiled and wrapped up in a culture that has whispered in your ear for decades, telling you exactly what reality should look like, or perhaps it's a form of indoctrination, right? So, I mean, that's just where I'm coming from. And, just to give you an idea, full scope of what's going on over here.
Wow. Okay. So, So basically, one of the most important things I think you talked about was why do it if there's no God, or why do it if there's no intrinsic value? And people ask me that, but if I don't have a God that I believe, like, how do I go about doing and reacting and responding in life? And my answer to them is, there are things that are pleasurable for me, and there are things that are not pleasurable for me. So when I come down to making decisions, I try to do things for myself that are pleasurable, and I try to avoid things that I don't find pleasurable. And I know that there are other thinking minds in the world who also value pleasurable things, and I try to make sure that I don't get in their way, as long as what they're doing isn't really harming me or harming others. So I don't think they need some transcendent value. Like, if I had my great grandma, and when she gave me a hug, I didn't need that value to transcend beyond at the time she was just giving me the hug. I think that hug was amazing, even though it only lasted right then and there. It didn't go beyond that.
You see, he has to basically state that he doesn't see why the hug has to be, special, transcendently, or But see, the thing is that there's something that's called a logical conclusion that says that if it's ultimately not special, because if there's no continuation of life, if there's no seeing your grandma yet again, if there's no hope, like the hope that the Bible offers about living in eternity and peace coming to the ultimately coming, us walking in peace, as in the the lion lies with the lamb, and the promises that are given in Scripture, the hope that the God worldview offers. If there isn't any of that, then ultimately it doesn't exist, number one. And number two, is it really special? Is it ultimately special if it really wasn't special, if it wasn't meant to be special, if it's just a blip on on the screen of time and chance and matter, you see, then none of it really matters. It wasn't special then either, because it didn't really exist. Okay? It didn't really exist because, the processes that you need in order to recognize the love felt between two people, and the what matters in terms of what love is. Love ultimately doesn't matter either. If it only mattered then, but yet it doesn't matter, in the transcendent meaning, for love's sake, for humanity's sake, and even for the individual's sake, you can ask yourself, is it actually even special to begin with? Was it special? If ultimately it isn't special, ultimately, if there was no transcendent value to it, why was it special even when it was happening? That's what this person has to give up when he says that, well, we're just matter in motion. He's just basically digging his heels in on this nihilistic worldview. But if you ask anybody, okay, that's not how they regard their grandmother. He probably wouldn't argue this way unless if he were not in a debate concerning his worldview. He would not smile at his wife or his daughter, or welcome some time with somebody, and regard them, well, this is only for now because this really doesn't mean anything. Could you imagine truly living that way? To think that everything that you did was only special because it's special at the time. You know what I'm saying? Who would really invest their time or their emotions, if in other people, in even their family members or their coworkers or anybody you had to do business with? Who would ever consider anything special, knowing that, yeah, well, this is just a blip in time and this ultimately doesn't matter? If you literally lived like that, what kind of a pathetic state that is.
Same thing for experiencing things that bring me pleasure. I think it's exhilarating to go skydiving. No, it won't do anything beyond once I stop skydiving. It just gives me the memory of skydiving. That memory probably could bring me joy, and the experience of me experiencing it with other people probably brings other people joy. But I don't see why there needs to be a transcendent experience that transcends beyond experiencing things here and now. And I don't know how. You started off saying you looked around at the world around you, saying that you can see God in everything. And I'm not sure how you can see things that the only way I've ever known reality to be is behaving and acting the exact way I expect reality to be. I don't know how you say, oh, look at reality and there's God. I don't know where God comes from other than the imagination of people who imagine there to be.
I mean, he could be confused about what I'm talking about, or he could be pretending to be confused about what I'm saying. I tend to believe that most people do understand what we're talking about, but perhaps he's making a stance like this because he's trying to defend his worldview. You see what I'm saying? But the fact is that we see things and we don't just say we don't appreciate a tree for the fact that it's a tree. We appreciate the things of life for more transcendent value that we place on things than we actually do. You know what I'm saying? In other words, life is the average person doesn't enjoy life because they believe that it's just their life now. They believe in it because they think there's something ultimately special about their life, about living itself. If life wasn't special because life is special, then most people would be suicidal or nihilistic because they would feel that, well, this is only special because, it's now. I mean, some people actually say, well, enjoy your life because it's the only one you're going to have. And so that somehow that's the reason why you should place value in it. But on the contrary, if it's all there is and it's about to, it's just, live for today because tomorrow you're going to die. The person who lives like that is a very sad individual because, again, life has no transcendent meaning other than the here and the now. You see what I'm saying? And to really live like that and to really believe that, the logical conclusion of that is that life really isn't all that special. If it's that fleeting, you know what I'm saying? Your endeavors mean nothing. Why work so hard? You're just going to get old and die. Why? Just enjoy and live like do whatever you want. get whatever you want from people, and just whatever. It's if that's the way one really truly believed, and most people don't believe that way. There would be abusers out there. There would be a lot more people just just going buck wild in society because they really truly believe that. But most people inwardly do not behave in this way.
God. So you can help us, or you can help me get to how you have, like, what makes you believe in God, and if it's the trees, how do you equate looking at the trees and the trees doing what you've always known trees to do? How do you look at that as, oh, this is evidence for a being that answers prayer, or that created a heaven or a hell?
I think it has to do with the transcendence of anything that actually exists, right? Like you look at a tree, you see a tree in the springtime, it's growing its leaves. Now it's getting very sunny. You're able to sit on the tree. The tree was where you first kissed your first girlfriend. The tree and all of these experiences you bring to objects all around us that make a
transcended tree is, because I don't know what a transcended anything is. So
yeah, that's what. Well, what I'm trying to say is that there's transcendence and importance that we give to life based on the creation around us, the thing that was created. Like, for instance, a tree might be for a child in second grade drawing a tree in a coloring book, and it's a one-dimensional thing, and it just is for the purposes of coloring. But let's say if you want to add transcendence to, are you there? Are you having internet issues?
What I'm basically at this point, he spent some time, a pretty long time, that his internet messed up. But what I'm trying to tell him is that the transcendence importance of things is because there's a creator who created them for the purposes of what he created them for. But on top of that, we enjoy them because not only are they created for him, because we give him glory based on our appreciation of these things. It's not just, that's a nice tree. And trees are cool because, they bring oxygen into the world. And you're thinking mechanically what they're good for, whatever, or, we appreciate these things far more than for the reasons that they're actually on the earth for, or at least the reasons why we think they're on the earth for. We add more value to them, to these things. And then on top of that, when we know that God created these things, when he just these things, like many things, the trees, the mountains, the ocean, the vastness of the universe, that we can look up at the stars, all of these things, it says, the Bible says that the heavens declare the glory of God. Okay? They're praising him in their beauty and in the majesty of its creation. There's value in that. It's not just a thing. It's not just a tool. It's not just a thing that has a process and a process and a function. The function goes way beyond that a person who's in the God worldview can appreciate. You see what I'm saying? Other than just appreciating something for its use or its utility.
I see you kind of faded. Are you able to hear this?
Let me see if I can fast forward where I can grab him, and then at this point, I'm going to cut it short because he's going to get into his idea of atheism and how he identifies as atheism. And then I tried to help him to no avail as to demonstrate to him that there is no neutrality, even in his ultra dimensional or new definitional, nuanced definition of atheism. Okay? Let's see. Let me see.
Side. It's been telling me for the last 20 minutes that its battery is getting low.
Oh, on to our personal understanding of these things. And it means a whole lot more when you say, okay, there's a purposeful creation by God, it now has a transcendent meaning to it. It's more important than just, okay, it's just there for the purpose of existing and allowing it for the process of humanity. It just becomes more important. It's the same thing with life. It's the same thing with love. I personally do not believe anybody walking the earth really believes that the grandma's hugs are only important because they're important only while I'm living. You know what I'm saying? Or love, or the necessity of reason, the necessity of this life as human beings. I believe that there's a transcendence to the importance of us as being God's creation. And so, just Aleph, are you at work? Yeah, I'm having a really hard time concentrating. Yeah, you're using all your tools today.
Oh yeah.
You got the whole box open, whole toolbox. I can't.
Let me see if I can
see that evidence. In my theology, it's because they've either been indoctrinated not to, or they've been that bamboozled and fooled not to be able to see God in his creation. You see? And so the person could come and you could tell them as much as you want, and perhaps the person is already committed to the denial of all things, and they're going to deny all the evidences as per coming from God. But in my understanding, if you go into the logical realm, I feel like, okay, well, this person is denying God, but then if you ask him, is there proof that God does not exist? Or is there, do you believe that God does not exist? Well, they obviously can't answer that because they haven't checked under every single rock or behind Pluto. So they can't say that. So if you say, well, is there evidence for God? And you say, well, I don't believe there's evidence for God either. So I said, well, in that case, your stance as an atheist is arbitrary because you've got no evidence to believe there's no God. You got no evidence to believe there's not God.
At some point here is where he's going to try to now define his very convoluted and confusing redefinition of what atheism is. Okay, and this is not the first time I come across somebody who tries to hijack the definition of atheism in its simple form of I just don't believe in God, or I don't believe in the evidence of God, or there is evidence of God, or the agnostic, which says I suspend the judgment as to whether there is or there is no God. It goes. These people take it way past now. Now it means a whole salad of stuff that you need literally a stenographer and a paper, pencil, and recorder to understand exactly what the hell they're talking about.
So, and then if you say, well, it's...
Hang on, BS. I want to make sure you understand that is the definition for atheist. So, a theist and an anti-theist are the only two people who make claims. A theist is saying that there is a God, and an anti-theist...
So he thinks that his position does not make a claim. But watch how many times he says that he doesn't believe. By saying you don't believe, that's a claim. That's a claim to knowledge. Okay? By saying you don't believe. To say you don't believe, to say you do believe, to say I don't know, I do know, those are all claims. So if you're going to be logically honest, that's exactly what that means. He's trying to get away from the accountability of making a judgment in one way or form, and he will not stay. He'll be slippery on this and equivocate, left, right, and center.
Atheist is saying that there isn't a God. An atheist is the neutral position between both of them. So if a person tells me that there isn't a God, I'd ask them, what is your evidence for there not being a God? And if a person tells me that there is a God, I ask them the same question. I say, what's your evidence for there is a God? I don't have evidence. I don't have sufficient evidence to support either one of those positions. And that's why I have the A position, which is an atheist. So it's a neutral position to have.
He just described, okay, well, I'm about to say exactly what I say what I'm going to say in the podcast.
It's actually not. I actually disagree. I don't believe there's
Well,
no neutrality.
well, I think ideals are more important. So I can, if you don't,
So to him, ideals are more important. I don't know what he means by that, but it sounds like the idea of something is more important than the actual accepted definition of something. So the reason why perhaps he's saying ideals, because he can change up the nuances of what was once a clear-cut definition of something.
if you look at if your definition for atheism is is something that's aside from from what I said my position is, then for you, I'm not an atheist. So atheist works for a lot of other people. When I tell people I'm an atheist, they understand that I mean I'm not convinced of the evidence for God. But for you, I don't mind saying I'm not an atheist. Because if your understanding for atheist is a different position and you're not wanting to accept the definition I gave you, then I don't know what to call me. I'm just a person who's not convinced there is a God, and I'm a person who's not convinced there isn't a God. So what would you have to say to a person like me?
Well, it,
Not what your for atheist is, just for a person like me who's not convinced there is or isn't a God.
well, that almost sounds like you're saying that you're agnostic. That's what it actually sounds like.
So my understanding for the definition for agnostic is about the knowledge of what you know. So a person saying that there could be a God, but I don't believe anyone can know there's a God. So I am agnostic. So
You notice how he's really changing these definitions around, because agnosticism, you look at it, I think it's in an Oxford dictionary. The Oxford definition of agnosticism is a person who suspends the knowledge of whether there is a God or no God. That's pretty clear cut. It doesn't get that much more confusing than that. But notice how he's conflating the two. It doesn't seem like he's completely, he's got his feet settled or solid on any one of these definitions himself.
I am also agnostic. So you could be agnostic theist. So a person cannot think that you can know there's a God, but still believe there's a God. That's agnostic theism. A person can be agnostic atheist, which is a person who is not convinced there is a God, but also don't believe you can know there's a God. And then there's an anti-theist who's agnostic, and that person can not believe you can know there's a God and also believe there is no God. So you can be agnostic with any of the positions for theism, but theism.
It almost sounds like his definitions have variations within them that contradict themselves.
Is the positive claim. Anti-theism is the negative claim, and atheism is the neutral claim. Only for are you convinced of what you believe. The agnostic is what you know. It's a knowing claim. I know there is a God. So
right,
or I don't believe you can know there is a God. So that's agnostic. So I am agnostic, but I also hold the position that I'm not convinced as well. So I don't know anyone who knows there's a God. I don't know how a person can know there's a God, but I'm also not convinced there is a God.
So if I were to ask you in simple terms, if I was to ask you what is it that you actually believe, how would you answer that?
It depends on what you're asking. What do I believe? So if you're asking,
You see, this is the I mean, the thing. This is the thing. You have to lose the shyness for recognizing the deception in people that are even being cordial with you. Now, you have to take the biblical stance, and this is the lesson. This is the teaching moment right here on this recording on the 39-minute mark and a half. Okay, we as Christians, as children of Christ, okay, as believers in God, we need to get rid of the bashfulness that we have, recognizing the deception behind people just because they come and they're soft spoken, they're intelligent, they're not rude, they're not foaming at the mouth, they're not hateful, they're people that are talking with you. Understand that we have to stand on the biblical understanding, the biblical reality, no matter how much our senses want to fight against it. and say, well, this gentleman just sounds like he's extremely confused. No, he's not confused. He's purposely evasive and equivocating against things of truth. He's redefining to the point of his comfort level, as long as he can squirm away from the accountability of being able to say, one way or another, that he's either denying or not denying the reality of God. And I'm going to continue to demonstrate that as we go along. Continue watching this song and dance that this gentleman is coming up with, and tell me if anybody can actually understand what he's saying and actually think that he's making sense. He's not, because he's changing definitions. He's evasive, and he's not trying to answer the question.
Do I believe airplanes can fly? I believe under the right.
I asked him, if I asked you, what exactly do you believe? And he's giving me an example about airplanes. I'm asking, we're talking basically, look at the topic above. We're talking about the evidence for, do you believe in God, or you don't believe in God? Okay? And instead of answering the question the way it was asked, he's giving me an airplane example. Now, is that fair? Is that somebody who's running literally from and evading the possibility of the truth shining on him, okay, regarding his open denial of God?
The airplane can fly. So the question would have to be, what do I believe? Because my belief on theism is I'm not convinced there's a God. So I don't have any belief when it comes down to a God. I'm not convinced there is a God.
Now, I am dead set on believing that there is no neutrality between the God worldview and the not God worldview. There's no neutrality, but that's my position. And when I demonstrate that,
there's no neutrality.
Yeah, there's no neutrality with regard to the God worldview and the not God worldview. So if I tell you that, when I tell you with regard to the God worldview and the not God worldview, what is it that you believe?
So my question to you then is, can I be convinced? So that doesn't make sense, because
you see, this is what I'm talking about. The question was clear. I told him my stance is, I believe in God. There's a God worldview and a not God worldview. Where do you believe? Do you believe in God or not? Where do you fall, in the God worldview or in the not God worldview? He's forcing neutrality where there is absolutely no neutrality. Okay? It doesn't make sense. He calls himself an atheist, folks. He calls himself an atheist. So all of a sudden, words have no meaning. Words have no value. Words don't mean anything. That means that somebody's going to ask you, your mother's going to ask you, okay, are you hungry? And you're going to be like, I can't tell her yes, or I can't tell her no. Okay? So it's like, she's going to knock you upside your head if you do that to her. We don't live like that in regular life. Okay? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It's either yes or no with the topic. Okay? It's either yes or no with the topic. Okay? And then we can move on to, why do you not believe? But he won't even go there. Because he knows that if he says, I don't believe in God, then the question continues. Then it's an open denial of God, and then he's got to have to prove God, or all the qualities of God as coming from God, and where do these things come from? And he's going to have to stand on something that he can't ground. Okay, and that's why he's being so evasive.
Because you can have a person who is convinced that something doesn't exist, and then so that doesn't make sense, because when it comes down to
if you can reverse it. If you ask me that question, I can answer it really quickly.
So there is a such thing as convinced, not convinced, and you don't know. So it's like I'm not convinced that unicorns exist, but I'm not convinced that they don't exist. I'm not convinced mermaids exist, but I'm also not convinced that they don't exist. So I have a neutral claim to mermaids. So I'm a mermaidist.
You see how he has to continue bringing up this whole issue with other uh, hypotheticals and other examples that do not that aren't even remotely related. Okay, we're talking about the God or the not God worldview. It's clear cut. But he's going to talk about a mermaid and put in the mind that we're talking about fantasy things, you see, to the audience. And that's equivocating, and that's being deceptive. Okay? If I were talking about a close relative of his, and I use an example of a beached whale, okay, it would be offensive. Why are you using that as an example? What connotations are you throwing in there? You see what I'm saying? So that's a type of evasive, intellectually dishonest tricks that they use all the time. He's forcing a neutrality where no neutrality can be. Because if you cannot, there's no such thing as denying, or rather, there's no such thing as being neutral with regard to the issues of God. Either you believe that these things, your breath, the things of the world, the things that you actually know are powered by God, and they necessitate, okay, the validity of an all powerful God. They either do or they don't. Do you believe that they do? Are you gonna say, well, I don't have an answer. I don't know. Okay? To say you don't know is to deny, is to implicitly deny that you don't believe they do. Okay? Because belief is a subset, or rather, believing is a subset of knowing things. Okay? So we're going to move on further, and I'm going to cut it short, but this is more or less where he's going to be going.
If that
So
makes sense.
yeah, but without diverting into other examples that are not in the present conversation, like mermaids and planes and stuff like that. Let's
Well, that's
stick
what I'm saying.
within.
So God is no different to me than a mermaid. So
No,
for me,
yeah, but I understand
know
that.
for you and God is different.
But for the
But
sake
when
of
I'm
the,
from my point of view, I can't separate God from a mermaid, and I don't know anyone who can. So God's fit is the same bucket I have mermaids in, which is
right,
I
but
am not convinced you exist. I'm
okay,
not convinced mermaids.
but you are able to stick to a subject, right? And so when we
No.
stick to a
I just want to make sure you know that I do hold a neutral claim for God. So if you only want to speak about God, I give you the other examples because I don't know how you can agree that I can have a neutral position for mermaid, but I can't have a neutral position for God. So how can I not have a neutral position for God if I'm
okay, so
not convinced it?
This you see the dishonesty here. We're talking about the God worldview. We both know that mermaids, that nobody believes in mermaids. Okay, and it's almost offensive that he's bringing up those type of fantasy things to talk about something with regard to truth, and yet he's calling himself a seeker or somebody who's seeking out the truth. You see, and he's talking to somebody whose worldview is that of God, but he's bringing up mermaids, and it's just dishonest of him.
Does exist, and
let
I'm not convinced it does.
let
I
let
don't know
me
what I don't know what to call that person.
let me, for the sake of the audience, because they are ultimately the judge of what's going on, right? They okay. So if I
Well,
ask the
no, that's
question, if
just listening in on what's going on. The conversation. The reason I only have you and me up here instead of like two or three or more people is because the ultimate conversation is between me and you, and I don't like when people overtalk. Like there's
no,
two people who are trying to ask one person on question. So I'm trying to prevent that, which is why I
right,
said
right,
we
right.
have listening.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But I'm saying with regard to what we're doing, you and I are doing up here now, with regard to the communication for the recording and also for the audience that are listeners, active listeners. I want them to hear the and understand us fully, right? So when I asked the simple question concerning the God and the God not the not God worldview and the God worldview, it's a very linear and straightforward conversation, right? If you ask me what is it that you believe with regard to the God and the not God worldview, I will say I believe in God. right? That's my answer. So if someone were to ask you, this is why I believe that there is no neutrality, because when you ask the atheist, and this is not nothing personal with you, but when you ask the
Right.
atheist, they can never answer the question directly, just as I did. They can't say, well, I do
Well,
not believe in God.
I thought I did answer. I thought I
No,
did
no, no.
answer and say
Let
I'm
me,
not
okay, let me finish though. I'm almost done.
okay.
With regard to the atheist, the immediate thing that will always happen, and everyone in the audience will notice this, if not today, for the future, that the atheist cannot answer the question as normally as, which way is Main Street? Oh, it's north. They can't answer it that way. It always ends up being a slip and a slide with usage of words and questioning, well, what does that mean? What does this mean? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by this? When we're talking in regular language. So that's why I believe that there's no neutrality with regard to the issues of God. You either believe or you don't believe. With regard to the question of the atheist and the theist, the question is, what is exactly do you believe when I ask you regarding the world views, God and not God? And if you say you believe something, then that's something that, and you're saying that other things are the claim, but you don't operate on a claim. Well, then you're automatically making the claim by saying I believe. The minute you believe anything, because belief is just a subset of knowledge. That a lot of people think that because they say they believe and they don't say I know, but belief is just a subset of knowing.
You're not fully listening to me because I said I'm not convinced that there is a God, and
Right,
I'm
and
not convinced.
because you're not convinced, that means that you do not believe, right?
No. So BX. The reason we have English and the reason we have words is because convinced and belief are the reason there are two words for that is because they're not the same.
So what happens?
You see, this is the play on words that we're talking about. Okay, he's he's trying so hard to maintain some kind of neutrality, or not maintain, or to introduce neutrality into his position, but he's failing miserably because it's just so obvious. You either believe or you don't believe. To say that you got some kind of neutral position in there is ridiculous. You're not demonstrating a neutrality. It just say he keeps saying that I'm not convinced. So if you believe you're not convinced, you're making a knowledge claim that you believe that you're not convinced of the evidence of everything around you that necessitates God, and by you saying that, you're denying him, implicitly. It's an implicit denial of the necessity, because that is the worldview. You see, the worldview of God is that everything that we know is necessitated by his existence. All of these things necessitate his existence, and if you deny believing that these things are necessitated by him, or even if you say that you don't think that there's enough evidence to prove or to demonstrate that these things necessitate him, that's a denial. That's a denial. Because you either believe or you don't believe, you either know or you don't know. If you don't think that that there's enough evidence, that's a knowledge claim. There's no other way around it. And this is what he doesn't recognize. He thinks that he found his holy grail of unaccountability, but he hasn't, and he's only fooling himself.
Because you're not convinced. What does non-convict? What does that mean?
You can believe something that you have not been convinced of.
Okay. So then that means that because you're not convinced, where does that take you?
So if you're not, who stays floating when they're not convinced of something? When you're not convinced of something, you will automatically have a stance. Okay? When you're not convinced of the properties of God and the necessity of God, then what automatically happens? You don't go to church, you don't worship God, you don't thank him for the air that you breathe. You live as a non-believer. So your lack of being convinced, okay, necessitates, if you can say, or brings upon a worldview that's void of God, because it's not sending you the other direction. He's not, because he's unconvinced. He's not going to church. He can go either way. He's pretending that he's neutral and that he can go any other way. He can go to church or not go to church. But that's not what he's doing. He's not giving glory to God. He's not thanking him for his life. He's not showing up in church. And then when somebody comes to, oh, you're new. How long have you been a believer? Oh, I'm not. I'm just sitting here. Does it make sense? It doesn't make sense. And people don't live like this in regular life.
No, I'm saying if I believe you told me you had a dog, but you haven't convinced me you have a dog. I can believe you have a dog just based off your word, but that doesn't mean I'm convinced.
Right. But then what position, what's the consequence of that?
What's the consequence of
what?
You see, I allowed him to take me into this doll example of his. Once again, he's doing it again, giving examples when he can't just clearly answer the question and stay within the framework of the argument. I mean, the God, not God worldview is big enough for you to be able to give answers for. Why are you going to reduce it to a silly example of a doll? But even then, you still have consequences that come as a result of not having confidence or not believing or whatever, not believing, not having confidence, it doesn't leave you in neutrality. Just like it doesn't in any other part of life. Neutrality doesn't make you all of a sudden a blank slate in your brain and you turn into a momentary zombie and you don't react. When you don't believe something, when you don't have confidence in something, you go the opposite direction. You go the opposite direction. You do something as a result of not having evidence, as a result of not having confidence. Okay? So that's not neutrality. Neutrality doesn't make you, your lack of confidence make you stay neutral and not make a decision. No. I mean, I'm pretty sure you could find some examples where maybe that may fit. Neutrality may fit. Maybe in voting. Well, I don't trust in the person that's there running for president. So I'm deciding I'm going to be neutral and I'm not going to vote. And even then, if you don't vote, they say that you give the vote to somebody else because your vote gets wasted. A vote that could actually go for one person or the other goes, it doesn't get lost. So that's a whole debate in itself. And that's another reason why I don't like going outside of the example at hand.
So the consequence of you not believe of that, let's say, okay, the person I say you have a doll, I have a doll, and you say I probably don't have a doll, but what's the consequence of what's your consequence based on that information? Where are you going to stand? Are you going to stand on the faith that he has it or the faith that he doesn't have it?
I wouldn't use faith to stand on
so
anything.
So what's your stand?
See, he doesn't like the word faith. That's another one of reason, in other words, that leads to, and he's using a lot of faith, because atheists use faith all the time, but they hate the word because the word has caused their worldview so much damage.
If a person tells me that they have a dog, I judge based off of what a person tells me, based off of whether or not it's reasonable or not for me to believe it or not. So if you tell me it's a dog, and I judge based off of what you're telling me, it's based off of how it affects me as well. So one thing to know is that you telling me you have a dog does not affect me at all. One. Two, it is not unreasonable for me to believe that you have a dog because dogs exist and people have dogs as pets. That is a thing I know to exist. So it's a very low claim that you're making. You're making a very low claim, and I don't understand the advantage for you making this claim to be a lie. So there's no reason for me to say within reason you are lying about this claim. I don't have to believe you, but I can believe that I don't have to be convinced that you have a dog because you haven't given me any evidence for your dog. But I can believe you have that dog. I can say that it's probable that you do have a dog. So,
yeah, but
he's using the doll example, and he's still not able to determine to present a solid case for neutrality, even in his own examples. It doesn't make sense. It really I just, it just doesn't make sense. He doesn't, his believing of whether or not I have a doll, where that leaves him in a consequence or in a lack of confidence, or a confidence where he has to make a decision anyway, regardless.
Yeah, about a God. It's actually about the God claim. The God claim, I do answer the God claim as simple and as clear as possible. And what it is that you don't accept one of the answers. What you're doing is you're saying that there's only two answers. And I just disagree that there's only two answers. I think that there's three answers to any question about claim, and there is a positive, a neutral, and a negative assertion. And I have a neutral assertion. I'm not convinced of the positive or the negative assertion. And by definition, if you're not convinced of the positive assertion and you're not convinced of the negative assertion, by definition, you are neutral to the assertion itself.
And that's exactly what he has not demonstrated. He has not demonstrated that he is neutral at all with the God, not God worldview. He hasn't demonstrated that. Just because he says that he's not convinced or whatever, that still brings about a living example of how you're going to live. For instance, like I said, he's not worshiping God. His stance, and his neutral stance, doesn't send him to God, doesn't send him to church on Sunday, doesn't get him on his knees thanking God for the day, for his children, for his friends, for his health. He doesn't worship God. So, why is it that his neutrality has him calling himself atheist? Why is it that his neutrality has him living the not God worldview? You see what I'm saying? So his stance, whether it's neutral or not, and I know it's not, it's still a denial of God, and it's still in living form a not God worldview product, because he's picked a side, and it's a side that's not neutral, and it's a side that's arbitrary. Because if he doesn't believe there's enough evidence for God, and there's not enough evidence for not God, why is he in some convoluted that he calls neutral, but it's not really neutral? Why is he's in that stance? Why is he not worshiping God? He's not worshiping God. So his neutrality has him looking more like a not God worldview person, and he's not fooling anyone.
I don't think that's you're able to demonstrate that, because when you, like, for instance, the fact, no, listen,
I
the fact,
I just demonstrate by saying is, if you try to convince me that there's not a God, I would demonstrate to you that I am not convinced that there is not a God. So I'm already demonstrating to you that I'm not convinced there is a God. But if you were to flip the conversation and say, well, there is no God, then I ask you, what is your evidence to suggest that there is no God? Because
you see, that's what he thinks. He thinks that his just saying that I'm not convinced that there's no God, so therefore I'm neutral. You see what I'm saying? That I can say there's no evidence that there's no God, that there's not a God, or that there is a God. He thinks that because he can say both those things, that he's being neutral. But the God worldview, and you'll see soon enough in the conversation, necessitates that he literally believes that everything that he knows comes and necessitates from the mind and the power of God. If he doesn't, whether he says he doesn't have confidence in it, or whether he says he doesn't see the necessity of it, just by saying that, not only is he committing himself to a truth claim, okay, to a belief or a knowledge claim, he's also implicitly denying God, whether he wants to admit it or not.
I'm not convinced that there is no God. By definition, I would fall into the category of neutral. I would fall into the category of not being convinced there is a God, and I'm not convinced there isn't a God. So I don't understand how you don't see that there is a neutral position for a claim, not just God claims. For any claim, there's a neutral position you can have for being convinced of something.
Okay, for the sake, once again, and I have to repeat, for the sake of the question, right? Like, for instance, if you believe, if it's either or, the God worldview or the not God worldview. God worldview would necessitate that everything that you know to be true determines and necessitates the existence of God. Okay, that everything you know, and you do know something, you know that your name is, you're calling yourself Aleph, right? So everything that you know in your surroundings necessitates that there's a God. The not God
No,
worldview denies that, right? So denies that. So if I
no,
add,
no,
but let
no.
me
I
ask
don't.
you,
I don't. I
but
don't need.
let me,
I don't need to know. Hang on. I don't need to know that there is a God or not a God. Believe that airplane under the right conditions fly.
okay.
God
So
doesn't have anything. My
See, there he said it. He said it. He said, I don't need to believe that there's a God or know that there's a God to, and he switched it again. Instead of talking about God, he started using airplanes again. He said, I don't need to know that the airplanes exist or the airplanes are real. But there you go. He just made a knowledge claim. He's basically saying that he doesn't, it doesn't, there isn't a it doesn't necessitate that God is the one, okay, who brings about the knowledge of these things. That it's not by his power that he has the knowledge, that he needs the knowledge for these things. Well, he's denying God. He's denying the God worldview, because that's the worldview that we're debating. We're debating the worldview that says that the God worldview consists of the mind of God, that of all things that necessitate come through him and are from him, and all this information comes through him, and that he's responsible and necessitates all of these things to come into being. Okay, that is the worldview we're debating. That is understood universally as to what the God of what God is, right? If we're talking about the Christian God, that's what we believe. So when he denies that all these things necessitate God, he's denying God, regardless.
my position on a God philosophy does not have anything to do with whether or not I can believe an airplane can be made to fly or not. I don't need a God for airplanes to fly, and I don't not need a God for airplanes to fly. An airplane flies whether gods or gods do not exist.
So the next question that I never get to ask him is, okay, so where then does the power and the necessity and the knowledge, the technology and the force and the reality of seeing an airplane flying and everything that has to do with airplanes flying, where does that come from then? If it doesn't come from the mind and the power and the necessity of God, where does that come from? Okay, he will not be able to answer me. Unfortunately, I didn't get to ask him that question.
yeah, but the thing is that when you say yourself, you that you do not believe, right? Yeah, or rather that you do not believe there's enough evidence, but nevertheless
No,
you are still an
I'm
atheist.
not convinced. So there's a difference. I believe airplanes fly, even though I'm not convinced a God exists, and I believe airplanes fly, even though I'm not convinced gods don't exist.
Right, but what I'm trying to tell you is that the reason why there's no neutrality is because with regard to the God and not God worldview, okay, the question is that either you believe or you don't believe. Do you understand? So if you don't believe for whatever, because you say there's not enough evidence, so you don't believe because there's not enough evidence. That's what you're saying. You're not believing in the evidence or saying that there's not enough evidence is why you're saying that you're calling yourself an atheist. Okay, that's the reason. That's what comes out of your claim that there's lack of evidence. Because of that, you are an atheist. So you are actually in the not God worldview because you are an atheist. So there is
No,
no neutrality.
no, hang on. I don't want you. So this is the thing. You can't suggest that I have a position that I have not said I have. The
Well, you're
position
an
that I
atheist,
have
aren't
is
you?
that I started off. My definition of atheist don't fit your definition of atheist, because your definition of atheist is a negative assertion for the belief of God. I don't have a negative assertion for the belief of God. I have a positive assertion. So this is what I'm saying. I started off as a Christian. I had no reason.
See, he's still really if you look at what he's saying that he has a negative assertion of the God worldview. But he's saying it's his description of that sounds more like he's describing himself as an agnostic, the person who suspends the judgment of whether or not there is a God. Okay, so he wants to stay in the I don't know realm, right? But then he earlier says he doesn't think that God necessitates, that any of these things necessitate the knowledge of God, the power of God, and the recognition of God, and all these things. That's what he already said. He said that he doesn't understand he doesn't believe that any of these things come from God. So basically, he's denying God. Regardless, he's denying God, and he doesn't really. I don't think he really fully understands that, or he doesn't want to admit it. So it's pretty much over at this point, because I think at this point we've established that it's all about digging in your heels at this point. I don't think he's not going to concede to anything, and neither am I. So
Not to believe. I only stopped believing because I started researching it. I started looking. So when I suggest something doesn't exist, I don't have enough information to suggest something does exist. That, by definition, on its own, is enough to say that I have a neutral position for that claim. And you're saying that even though I am not convinced that that something doesn't exist, and I'm not convinced that something does exist, that you're saying that somehow in there, I have the assertion I'm convinced it doesn't exist. And that is the part that's not true. I have no evidence supporting any claim that a God does not exist. I have no evidence supporting that.
But that's what I'm saying. My saying that if you find that God does not necessitate everything that you know around you, does not necessitate the determining fact that wow. If you claim that everything that you know around you does not necessitate the necessity of God, then right there you're saying that you don't need any of those. You don't need any of that to determine God. So right there you are rejecting the God worldview. I don't know if you can hear me with all that.
Yeah, I can hear you. So,
you understand what I'm saying? Because when you say that everything that you know of that does not necessitate, and you've already said that, you said it doesn't necessitate. I don't need God to be able to make sense of everything around me. Well, you just by saying that, you've negated the necessity of God, with the God worldview, which is defined as the necessity for all human life and everything we know around us.
You are the person who asserts that God is the necessity for all human life.
Right, and you're denying it. You're denying that claim.
I'm not denying that claim. I'm saying I'm not convinced of that claim. I'm not convinced of the claim that God is the necessity of all human life, and I'm not convinced of the claim that God is not the necessity of all human life. I'm not convinced of either claim.
But you don't believe it. But you don't believe that your breath, when I ask you, do you believe that your breath necessitates the existence of God? What would you say?
So I would say I am not convinced that it has anything to do with a God.
Here, there it is. You see, he's not convinced that everything that's around us, necessitates the necessity for God. Okay, he just said it. So he implicitly denies God, but somehow he wants to fit neutrality in there. And there's no neutrality when you say you're not convinced, that everything that you know around you is necessitated by the existence of God and the power of God, because that is the worldview that we're debating. We're debating the God worldview. The God of the Christian God is not the Christian God if everything that is and that will always be does not necessitate his existence, you see, and does not define as coming from him. If you take that away, that means he's no longer God. That is the worldview. So if he denies that, and he denies confidence in that, and he says that I don't believe, I don't think, I don't know, knowledge claim. He doesn't know what the The God worldview says, yes, I believe those things come from him. The ungod worldview says that no, those things do not come from them, or negating it. You can either do it softly, implicitly, or you can do it hard or explicitly, like the hard atheist. But that's what he's doing, and that's what I think the audience is obviously seeing.
So my thing is that if you say you're not convinced, but you're also not convinced that it's not, but you're still calling yourself an atheist. So then it's arbitrary to say.
My understanding for atheist is the one that's in the dictionary. Okay, so I don't know what dictionary you're using for.
But see, I'm not. Listen to me.
See, again, he's equivocating on the definition of words. Okay, he's equivocating, and it's, I do believe he knows that he's caught. Okay, he knows he's caught, because first he was talking about his definition. He wasn't emphasizing on the definition that, of anything. And every definition of atheism that he uses is being refuted. Okay, so in demonstrating, basically, he's got nowhere to go. He's got nowhere to hide. You know what I'm saying? To try to demonstrate some kind of neutrality. All he has is a statement that he has a neutral stance. But when you talk to him, you could see that he doesn't have. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with what he's saying.
I'm basically just following what you're saying. You're saying that you don't believe the necessity of everything around you necessitates God.
No.
But then you said you
I'm an atheist, and I agree that by the definition, I am an atheist. But the definition that I use for atheist is a person or lack belief in the existence of a God or God. The reason that there's an
the not God worldview.
An or right there is because I'm saying I am in fact an atheist because I am a person who lacks belief of the existence of a God or God. I am that person. Atheist covers both and or in its definition that's used. If you look up the definition on Google, if you look up the initial definition in a dictionary from before it was placed on the internet, it only says it only covers a person who disbelieves or a person who lacks in a God or God. But it's only new that it says a person who disbelieves or lacks belief. And what I'm telling you, I'm the type of atheist who only lacks belief that there is a God.
Yeah, but if you, that's what I'm saying. But I'm basically just, every time you push me left, I go left, and I just go along with where you're pulling me. You're saying that I'm not saying anything that contrary to what you're saying. You're saying that you lack belief. You keep saying lack belief. But if you lack belief, that means that you're saying that you lack the belief in the necessity that everything that you know comes from the mind of God and the power of God, the existence of God. So if you lack that belief, you obviously don't believe it. If you lack it, that means you don't believe it. And if you don't believe it, then you're automatically in the non-neutral, not God worldview.
No. If you lack belief in something, that is true that you don't believe it. But that's not true that you're saying it does not exist.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because by saying you lack, but by saying you don't believe, you lack belief in it. That means that it doesn't necessitate that everything that you know of comes from God. That's the same thing.
There's still a side of the argument because if the reason is not the same thing, is because a person can literally make the exact same argument in reverse, and I would still not believe that. Just like you're saying, I don't believe he's the necessity. I don't believe he's not the necessity. When your belief for something both holds true for both, when your belief holds opposite the truth of something that is a positive claim or a negative claim, then you hold a neutral claim to that position. So everything you're saying
I'm not
is
convinced
right.
of that.
The part that you're forgetting is that we're going to say anti-B exists. And anti-BX Blues is an anti-theist. And he's saying God is not the necessity to life. He's not. I would tell him, I am not convinced of that. I don't believe that. And at the same time, I'm telling you the exclude that you're saying God is the necessity of life. I'm telling you, I'm not convinced of that. I don't believe that. Not
It's
believing
a
in something and not this or something, not it's not the same as saying it is false. I'm not calling to because when you say that it's false, that means I'm saying you are telling a lie. And the thing is that I don't know that you are lying. I have no way of measuring whether or not you're lying or not. That's why we
okay.
have the
My
conversation to figure out what
okay.
tools are you using your claim.
Mhm. My point is that what you're doing is that what you have here is not an explicit but an implicit rejection by saying that you lack belief because belief, or rather that you lack belief because belief is just a subset of knowledge. So
Yes,
it's
and
still a rejection.
I'm lacking knowledge. No, lacking the knowledge of a God is not the assumption of anything. It's the lack of assumption. When you believe in a God, then someone asks you, why do you believe in a God? And you don't have an answer as to why you believe in a God, then that is assuming a God exists. I'm not confident to say a God. I don't have any evidence to support the claim
Right.
that makes me confident that God exists. And I don't have any evidence to support the claim that makes me confident saying he doesn't exist. Again, by definition, because I am
He can go on and on and on, and he's still not demonstrating neutrality. Just because he says, well, I can believe or I can know, it doesn't help his situation out at all, because he's still not going to church. He's still not worshiping God. If that's where his lack of confidence or his lack of belief or his lack of confidence in the evidence or lack of belief in the evidence of God, if that's where it takes them, then it seems to be leaning more in the not God worldview than it does in in the God worldview or anywhere in between. He wants to put his feet on both things, but as we see here, that's a wasted endeavor, because the Lord Jesus Christ himself said, "You're either for me or you're against me." There's no neutral position, not for the believer, not for the unbeliever. The Lord spoke, "You're either for me or you're against me." He's not leaving any kind of neutral ground.
using both sides of the argument.
Actually, when there was talk of some kind of neutrality, the Lord says he talked to a church that he said was lukewarm. He says you're either not, you're either hot or you're cold, and you're neither. You're lukewarm, and so I'm about to spit you out. Okay? That's what God thinks about neutrality. Okay? He doesn't want neutrality. You're either cold or you're hot. You're either with me or you're against me. There's no neutral ground.
That puts me in a neutral position. The
Yeah,
only
I don't
position I
believe
can
that.
have.
I actually don't. I not only do I not believe that, but I also believe that it can't be argued. It just because
Oh,
I don't believe that you're demonstrating neutrality. All you're demonstrating is an implicit rejection based on what you're saying is lack of belief. Because if you say to yourself when we're talking about the God and the not God worldview, you're talking about having a sense that you don't believe that the evidence around you that necessitates the
no.
determining
So
factor that God. Wait, let me finish. If you're saying that it doesn't necessitate God, then in that case, then you're outside of the God worldview. That
okay.
makes you in
Hang
the
on,
God in the not God worldview, rather.
hang on, BX. You're the one who's asserting that the stuff around you is evidence for God.
Purple wrap.
So
See if it's on.
hang on, BX.
I don't know if I got to jump.
Okay, so at this point, we basically got
Yes, you
pretty
do.
much
Yes, you do.
But
went. Hang
but you
on,
have
hang
my
on. Let me
mouth.
turn this on. At this point, we basically demonstrated what we needed to demonstrate. Um, he he basically could not ground what he was saying. I don't believe that he made a good argument for neutrality on his position. He really wanted to have a neutrality, but like I said, neutrality is with regard to God is impossible. You can't do it logically. You can't do it physically. You can't do it in your worldview. You can't do it in your life. Okay, this has been a long video so far. I will end it here, but I do appreciate that the gentleman was cordial, unlike many other atheists. And he tried, and we had a good discussion, um, but without a doubt, this is what's out there. Um, you have to understand, get rid of the bashfulness of recognizing that the person is in running from God. So I will definitely be praying for this individual, this person. He's a soul. He says he once came to faith. I'm pretty sure he came under the wrong pretenses. He saw stuff he should not have seen. He wasn't led. He wasn't discipled. Whatever the case is in his personal life, I pray that he will continue to ask questions. He will continue to think and ponder these things, and that the Holy Spirit will drag him to the foot of the cross, and he'll demonstrate true things to him, and he will communicate true life and love to this individual so that he can see what true life is all about and what truth is really, what it is to really be a seeker. Understanding these things, because he's a soul created in God's image. He is a person who has family and love, and he's committed. He's really committed to all of this atheist popular philosophy speak that's going on today among young people. He's highly intelligent, and articulate, and you know and he's just a dude out there, asking questions. And I don't know what real deep down in the heart motives he has for these and challenging people. I know a lot of people that call themselves Christians cannot defend or really argue with this person, might actually even send them going further in the wrong direction. But I pray to God that God will, definitely send them in the right direction, and that, he will think about these things on his own, because God has given us the reason, the critical thinking, the honesty, the heart, the pure, the possibility of purity in our hearts to really be honest with ourselves. Let's ask ourselves. We have to really come to the. I mean, there's so much more I could have spoken to him, about our sins, about the truth of what we see in the world, you know, all of these things. You can just talk on for days on these things, but as you can see, we get caught in a lot of this stuff, and when a person